Listener discretion is advised. This episode discusses homicide, violence, and sensitive themes that may be disturbing to some listeners. Please take care while listening. Hey there, my name is Kate, and this is Dark Roast Caffeine Case Files. So grab a coffee or whatever you're drinking, because this is definitely a caffeine-fueled space. I've always been into true crime, like always. I'm that person who hears a case and immediately starts asking questions. The ones that never quite get answered, the why, the how, the what doesn't make sense here. I do have a law and justice background, not a professional, and I'm not claiming to be, but it's always shaped how I look at these stories. I care about the details, I care about what's missing, and honestly, I care a lot about the justice for people who didn't get it. This podcast exists because I'm someone who can't let unanswered questions go. I like rabbit holes, I like pulling threads, I like sitting with the uncomfortable parts of a story and asking, does this actually add up? And if I'm being honest, basically love coffee with my oxygen. So yes, this podcast will absolutely be caffeine fueled. Expect rambling, curiosity, and probably a few wait, hold on moments. I'm not here to be perfect. I'm here to ask questions, search for the truth, and talk through the cases that stick with me, the ones I can't stop thinking about. So welcome, pour yourself another coffee, get comfy, and let's get into it. Imagine being one of the richest people in Canada, fighting everyone in court, making enemies across the pharmaceutical world, and then you and your wife are found strangled in your own basement, and police say that it might be a murder-suicide. Let's talk about the Shermans. Hey friends, welcome to your first episode of Dark Roast Caffeine Case Files. I'm Kate. Thank you for being here. We're all new here, so let's just grab a coffee because we're about to dive into one of the most unsettling, confusing, and honestly haunting unsolved cases here in Canada. This is one of those cases that keeps people up at night, the kind where every answer leads to 3 more questions, and nothing ever feels fully resolved. But before we talk about the murder, before we talk about suspects, we need to talk about who Barry Sherman really was, because this case will make way more sense once we do. Barry Sherman was known to be a lot, like genius level, smart, tense. He was born here in Toronto, Ontario in 1942. He was born into a Jewish middle-class family. His father owned a shoe factory. Barry grew up around business, competition, margins, and pressure. He wasn't raised in luxury or ease. He learned how he had to earn it, protect it, and defend it. So let that sit with you a while. From a young age, Barry stood out, and not because he was warm or social, but because he was brilliant. In school, he skipped grades, he excelled in math and science, and by his mid-teens, it was clear he was operating on a totally different level than every other child. And here's a detail that tells you everything about Barry. He entered the University of Toronto's engineering program at 16 years old. Yep, you heard me correctly, 16. And not because he had to, but because it was the hardest program available. This will track. This wasn't someone asking, what's the easiest way to succeed? No, that wasn't Barry. He was someone asking, what's the hardest path and how do I beat it? That mindset never changed. He went on to earn a PhD from MIT and goes into pharmaceuticals after he graduated, and he eventually builds Apotex, which has become Canada's largest generic drug company. But Barry didn't just compete. He fought and he sued everyone. The government, competitors, former partners, and even family members. Yes, you heard me right. Family members. Can you imagine that? Listen to this mind-blowing fact. At one point, Apotex had over 12,000 lawsuits against the Canadian government. Barry also seemed to have a very interesting sense of humor. because he once joked that Apotex wasn't even a drug company. It was a quote, a legal company that sold pills on the side, end quote. And honestly, that tells you everything about Barry. Some people admired him, some feared him, and a lot of people absolutely despised him. And that matters later. Now, Honey Sherman. Well, Honey, she was known as social, warm, and quite the very opposite of Barry. She was visible in Toronto's philanthropic world with Jewish charities, foundations, boards, and events. She was a connector, a presence. However, her background was very heavy. Honey's parents were Holocaust survivors. She was born 1947 in a displaced persons camp, and she immigrated to Canada with her family when she was just a child. She and Barry had met through mutual friends, 1970, old school, not like these days with Tinder and other dating apps. And they married in 1971, almost a year to the date after they had met. And Honey and Barry had 4 kids, decades of wealth, and from the outside, they looked like a Toronto power couple. However, behind the scenes, there were tensions, and a lot of them. Personal, financial, and legal, all swirling around them, especially when it came to money. Here's where it gets messy. Barry was known to be generous, sometimes extremely, and especially with his kids, he'd give money, loans, help fund things, and reportedly not equally either. Well, Honey, she hated that. She wanted their children to grow up, work, earn, and not be entitled. And of course, like most mothers, she worried money would ruin them. Even Honey's sister Mary was close with the family, and at one point, she reportedly had similar concerns for her own kids. Their finances became tangled over time. There were loans, properties, trusts, spending money, and business connections, a whole web of things. And the reason that this matters is because after the murders, those connections explode into lawsuits, estrangements, and people not speaking ever again. So keep that in your pocket. Money, family, and tension. Bad mixture. Now, this is where Barry Sherman's story stops being impressive and starts being dangerous. Because when you take someone who is hyper competitive, emotionally distant, resistant to authority, and obsessed with winning, and you scale that personality into a multi-billion-dollar industry, you don't just build success, you build enemies, a lot of them. But who would want them dead? Barry didn't believe in compromise if he thought he was right. He didn't soften his approach to protect relationships, and he didn't care if people took things personally. And people always took things personally. And understandably, especially when you cost them money, you embarrass them in court, and you beat them repeatedly, and you expose their weaknesses. These companies don't like that. They don't like to be embarrassed or lose money and have their weaknesses exposed. We all know this. However, Barry, well, he did all of that. His enemies fell into a few categories: big pharma, companies losing billions because of generics, governments and regulators sued relentlessly, former partners, and obviously some walked away angry, and there were family tensions, money, loans, and so on. Barry himself once said, quote, "Why don't they hire someone to knock me off?" End quote, which is very haunting in hindsight when you hear this, right? On December 13th, 2017, Barry and Honey, they had met in Barry's office at Apotex. They were going over some design changes for their newly built home. Honey had been planning to leave for vacation in Miami a few days later after that meeting, and Barry is supposed to join her about a week after that. That meeting is the last time confirmed that they were seen alive. It was known that later that night, Barry had sent out routine work emails to his Apotex staff, and then there was nothing. Silence. Eerie silence. Which is odd because Barry suffered from insomnia and he usually emailed people or called people late at night. Nothing from Barry. The next day, December 14th, Barry didn't show up to work, and that was also very out of character for him. On the morning of December 15th, neither Barry nor Honey were expected to be home that morning. As normal, the housekeeper had let herself in, the gardener had shown up. Routines continued on in the household. Later that morning, 2 real estate agents had shown up with potential buyers. They were showing the house, and then they took them downstairs to show them the indoor pool area, their lap pool. And, well, unfortunately, that's when they find them, Barry and Honey, dead. And this part is unsettling. They were found in the basement near the pool, strangled with leather belts tied to a metal railing. They were fully clothed, and they had coats pulled down over their arms, restraining them. Barry had been seated upright, legs crossed, and Honey was on her side with some bruising on her face. And the word that kept coming up was posed. No note, no forced entry, nothing stolen. And the police, when they begin to investigate, initially say murder-suicide, which immediately the family, media, basically everyone say absolutely not. And I agree. Strange. Very strange. So the initial autopsy was found inconclusive. So the family had hired someone private and did a second autopsy. Then only was the cause of death officially ruled homicide. And now, of course, the police, well, they began to backpedal. The family hired private investigators, and at first they offered a $10 million reward. And eventually they increased it, reaching $35 million reward. Police, they executed dozens of warrants, and they collected thousands of hours of surveillance footage from around the home. They say they had a working theory, but no suspects were named, no arrests were made, and now years go by. And these are things that still make people feel uneasy about this case. At the time they were found, Honey's phone was found in a bathroom that she reportedly never used. Barry's gloves and paperwork were left near the garage. There was an unlocked basement door and a window left open. So, as you can see, someone appeared to know the layout of the house. They were very familiar with at least that area of the house. Now, when the bodies were found positioned, police say they were found resembling sculptures in the home, and which is very strange. Years later, police finally released surveillance footage. It was a person in dark clothing walking calmly through the neighborhood on a snowy night. And they say this one person is their only suspect. And that's it. Still no name, no follow-up. This case wasn't just about money. It's about power, reputation, and enemies that you don't even know you've made. It's also about an investigation that, depending who you ask, either hit a wall or they missed something. After Barry and Honey were killed, her estate files, things tied to money, trusts, succession plans, internal disputes, became a part of the investigation. The Sherman family asked the courts to keep many of those files sealed, and their reasoning was for safety and privacy, and having concerns that releasing details could put people at risk. To this day, 2026, there are still no arrests, no charges, which means there's still no closure for Honey and Barry. This is just a very unfortunate situation where 2 people were murdered in their own home, and a country is still asking why. Why is there no answers? This is one of those cases where every theory feels possible. Nothing is satisfying in whatever answers are given. And people want to know, was it business? Was it personal? Or was it symbolic? Was it someone they trusted, had known a long time? Who was it? That's what makes this case so unsettling, because someone out there knows exactly what happened and they're still walking free to this day in 2026. If this case stuck with you, or if there's a detail that hasn't sat right with you, let me know. I would like to hear more information if you have it. And if you have any other story ideas, please let me know. And that'll give us more coffee and more crime. Take care of yourself today. Thank you for listening. Bye now.